command name. And if they do the set command name, I need to look at the variable value that they do. And that tells me, so I do all of this just to find out that in this this is the example that they give on the Spring Framework. You download Spring Framework up until a month ago, you get this example. So all of this to find out these two names, account form and order form, and that class. I had to do all that work to find that out. Now try doing that for an application that has 500,000 lines of code, right? You can do it, but it's a pain in the ass, right? So what I do then is I then visualize that, because remember that I have an object model, so I can show you the object model for the account, and I can show you the object model for the, what's it called, for the order. And here's the vulnerability. I then added all of this as rules to the engine, and I run the scan. But here you can immediately see some of the problems. So if you look at this, right, you can see, for example, here, the credit card, where is it? Where is it? Set total price. So check this out. So the way this works, on Jetpack Store, there's a wizard, right? You choose what you want, you enter your credit card details, and you confirm. The problem is that they populate the same object all the time. The problem is that Spring MVC would dynamically bind every time you submit to the same object. So what I do is I buy something, right? Then I confirm using some credit card details, and then when I submit the confirmation, I call this set total price. So, and then I can change the price. So the problem, the advantage of this is I'm using almost like a combination of analyzing XML, grabbing the modeling of the actual source code, finding out all the potential entry points of malicious data, running a scan, analyzing that, and get a nice juicy set of results, right? And for me, that's real world apps. So, you know, the difference between this and an authorization problem is I need to check if there is a second call down the line that is an authorization call. You know, the difference between this and, you know, almost other variations is just a formula. So if my view is that if a human can find it, I will find it and I will script it. So for me, I built an engine that matches how I want to work. And it's not nice, it's not easy to use, but once you use it, it's like driving a plane, so, or flying a plane. So hope that made sense. And have time for questions, or? Okay. Anybody has?
So can you explain the relationship between, obviously, the closed source ounce tool and all this stuff? Like, I can see regexes you can use on your own, but how much of this other stuff can you use without ounce underneath the hood?
The thing that you can't use without ounce, so the thing you don't have here is the ability to follow tainted data, so the ability to create the traces, and the ability to create the CIRs. But actually, I'm releasing a tool that will give you a very base CIR for .NET. Because, for example, right, the way this works is the CIR dump occurs during scanning, and I was sort of analyzing the .NET framework, and I needed to model the entire .NET framework. So I actually built a CIR converter, which actually is generic. So I'm actually going to publish a CIR that will allow you to go to any .NET component and just create the data that you can then visualize it. So, if, for example, if you can do this for Java, you actually don't need the scanner to perform this type of analysis. And I think, like yesterday I was talking to a guy from PHP, and it's like, hey, look, if you guys can convert, you know, they're already halfway there. So look, if you convert your opcode into this, you get all the visualizers for free. Because ultimately, the way this makes sense from an ounce point of view is that ounce also needs the visualization. Also needs to know all the entry points. So ideally, I would like the Spring framework to develop those bits, because they know all the backdoors that exist on that thing. They know every single crazy functionality that they add to it just because people might need it. So that should be created by them. So I think that the dynamic at the moment is that the bit that is not open source is the actual capability of running the scans. And actually, it'd be interesting if other vendors, right, like actually also said, hey, we can plug in, right, and we do the scan. So then, hey, the best scanner, you know, wins. And we should have an open source version of it, which actually, I think Owasp, we had the Horizon, and I want to see if I can plug that so he can also do some scans.
Will this work with languages such as Ruby or Python?
You mean the GUI? Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, I want to expose this by IronPython, but so Python, yeah.
Will it analyze the code?
Well, you need to build to analyze IronPython. You need to have the converter from Python into the CIR. But the view is that if you can do that, then you can start to visualize this. And sometimes the complexity depends on language. Like if you go to C++, it's not just following data, right? It's like buffer overflows. There's all sort of variations that, depending on the language, the engine needs to be more or less complex. So yeah, I hope that I hope that what we then have is like this kind of huge, large set of kind of parsers that can bring into this. So we have way much more visibility into all these other languages.
Hi, the tools continue to evolve to get better. My gut feels are 35% maybe of what a human can find. So it's been an evolution. Do you foresee a revolution at some point with how these things work so that we can get closer to approximating human?
Well, you see, I solved that problem by not having that problem. So I'm not saying that it's the human versus the tool. I'm saying it's the human with the tool, right? That's the way I do it. So at the moment, I'm saying that I find 100% of what the human finds because I'm the human, right? In fact, I might argue that I find 150% because I have more capabilities. So, and one of the things that I think is important, like from a client point of view, right? You can't give this to a client, right? There's no way, an end user can use this. But what you actually are creating is a customized version of the application that actually the client wants to buy. So the message I was trying to model to create is that we should be working together. This is not about fuzzers versus black box versus white box. It's like everything. It's like you need everything that you can get and every resource you can get. You need to analyze everything from all angles, right? And then to have a definitive answer. But then what I like is the concept that we actually create that one-click button, because that one-click button is the one that can be integrated on STL. Right? You can't put something on STL that's going to generate 50,000 findings, but you can create something on STL that can create 10. Or you can create something on STL that the moment the guy goes off, you get an alert. Mr.
So I'm a really big fan of this, of course, and we've been doing the same thing as well behind the scenes, and hopefully we'll get together and unify them today. My experience is that the tools get about 17% of the total problems, not 30, and that's all the tools. You've built this, we've built our own on top of Eclipse. Eclipse and the IBM guys are building their own. I think there's a tremendous capacity to give this to thought-leading clients. DTCC is one client that we've had that started with Secure's tools, is using Fortify. They have a rich commitment to actually doing the client-specific things that they need to find more than 17%. Other organizations are too. To this guy's point, there's a question of, well, do you support this, do you support this? And you've built this all on your own. You're a wicked fast coder. But to what extent do you think that this should actually be integrated from a market perspective into Eclipse and actually become part of the process as opposed to these separate things that, because we have our own separate thing too, and it becomes unwieldy, right? So we spend our time developing these wicked tools, and they meet our needs, but they're not, so I guess comment on what the opportunity for penetration on this is until we get into a more common platform.
Well, see, I feel that I landed here at an example of a common platform. So there is, what we have now here is a common language. As long as you speak CIR, right? As long as you speak, that safe assessment file format, there's no reason why this is not built in Eclipse. In fact, one of the big things I always felt that should happen is that every framework and every application should be providing their own code scanner, because they're the ones who develop it. So in that idea, of course Eclipse should have a built-in model of this, right? And not just Eclipse.